Josh here. I was really hoping I was going to get away with only having to film on Wednesday after the announcement of the judge program was made. I knew there was going to be this rules update on Tuesday, and I was like, please let it not be something huge so I don't have to make a video and cover it right away. And I didn't get my wish. So here we are, filming on Tuesday. This announcement is momentous. Erik's Curiosa has fundamentally changed how they intend to deal with cards that are causing problems in the game. Usually their response is, we're going to wait for the next set. They have decided now that they are going to use Errata to make changes to cards. That is huge. For those of you that have not read the announcement, I recommend you pause this video, go to the description of this video, and go read the full announcement. Because I cannot stress what this change means for the future of the game. If Erik's Curiosa is willing to do this, they could do it a lot. Now, I don't think they will. I think they will use it very sparingly because there are negatives to this type of thing. Now, I will get to those at the very end of this video. So, you've read the announcement. I am actually going to start with the end of the announcement because I feel like that change is much less involved than the first part of the announcement. So what was that? When the Codex released, a major change was made to how sites could be struck. You could strike a site, cause damage, which results in life loss. That was a change from the way it was before. Because of that change, a small number of cards saw a huge increase in their power level. The primary cards were Dapperil Vampire, Grim Gisarm, and Mask of Madness. Now, a few other cards did benefit: Blood Ravens, Sir Galahad, Lance. Yeah, Lance. So those cards also benefited, but they didn't really see the high levels of play that the other three did. Sir Galahad did see some play, and certainly with Gothic coming, many people think he would see some play, or more play, and become more of a staple. With this change, it's going to be interesting to see if that plays out. But let's get back to the change itself. So the change now is that the text against units is going to be part of the text for each one of these cards. So at the appropriate point in the text, against units is added. So the Dapperil Vampire strikes made by Dapperil Vampire, heal you the same amount, but it's going to be strikes against units, right? That's what you're going to add. So now we're back to the place where the Dapperil Vampire cannot strike a site and allow you to gain life. Grim Gisarm doubles the damage, right? Strikes by a unit with Grim Gisarm double the damage. Well, now it's strikes against units with Grim Gisarm double the damage. A huge change, bringing these cards back down in terms of their power level. Now, for the Dapperil Vampire, still a good card. It's undead. Gothic is coming with a lot of undead. I'm sure Dapperil Vampire is still going to see play, but it's no longer a ridiculously good card. It's a good card, and that's good. Grim Gisarm, Mask of Madness, probably a little bit more damaging for those cards. Although it's still possible to pull off the shenanigans that they were doing if you can hit the avatar directly. So what do I mean by that? Because of Grim Gisarm and because of Mask of Madness, we had entered a state where if your opponent played a 5-power threat in your following turn, you had to get that off of the board. It had to go away. And if you could not do that, what you risked was that the individual would then play Grim Gisarm or Mask of Madness. And in doing that, now all of a sudden you're taking 10 damage, when that unit moved in to attack your site. And heaven forbid they had a couple of Taurus Hammer trinkets to boost its power even more, so every Taurus Hammer was effectively 2 instead of 1 power. They could also do other things, and this is the part that actually still stands. That 5 power threat, if it's lined up with your avatar is a unit. They can play Grim Gisarm, play Grapple Shot, come in, hit you for 10 from the grapple, and then use their move and attack ability to hit you for another 10. And because they're attacking your unit, that doubling effect would still apply as long as they're hitting your avatar. So it's not like this cannot happen, but certainly using it in a way where, you know, if there had been chip damage early in the game, if you've been able to bring your opponent down to 12, right? If your opponent's down to 12, you play that power 5 minion out onto the board, and then in your next turn, hope they let it live, play Grim Gisarm, Taurus Hammer Trinket. Now it's a 6. Now it's going to deal 12 damage when it attacks the site. That's what was happening. And then you brought him to death's door. No more. That will only be the 6, 5 power, the 1 for the Taurus Hammer. You're not going to get that doubling when attacking the site because of this change. Overall, I think this change is actually very good for the game. The removal of threats is still very important. It's still a very fundamental concept. But being able to have some breathing room to know that unless they can pull off that grim grapple shot combo to get to your avatar, or they're within range of your avatar in some other way, gives some more breathing room and makes it so that getting death's door isn't done just like that because a threat was not removed. In addition, this change for Lance, I actually think is pretty good. Being able to use the Lance's first strike ability and, you know, get a little boost to the power, you know, on those little knights that are 3/2s. Well, that first one, yeah, they can deal 4 damage. Losing it to a site felt bad. So now, all of a sudden, if your unit has a lance, it can attack a site and not lose its lance. So that threat is there. You can actually use those units proactively to attack sites and not lose your lance. So your opponent is going to have to come into the first strike ability of that lance. That's good. That, you know, they're going to either need a bigger minion that can survive the strike, or they're going to have to trade, you know, potentially 2 minions to get rid of that 1 card. So this is actually really good for Lance. And honestly, I think Lance needed it. Lance just hasn't seen a ton of use, so it's nice to see this come back. So I think that's good. But overall, this change, I like it. Makes sense. It's good. I think it's going to bring the game state into a better place. Now let's get to the beginning of the article. Druid has been completely errated. So the first change is on the Druid's front side. If this is your first turn, summon Tawny here. No more infinite Tawnies. No more Tawny coming back over and over and over. I have a gripe with this change. I'll get to that in a minute. I'm okay with not allowing infinite Tawnies, but I have a gripe with this change, and I'll get to that in a second. The backside. This is a big this change feels, when I first read it, it didn't catch in my mind what this actually means. So let's just talk about that. Nearby allied sites have, whenever an enemy enters here, it takes 1 damage. So the Druid's ability now cannot be used to affect your opponent's sites. That's a pretty big deal. I know when I use Druid, I would want to move up 1 space, and I use this primarily against charge minions that were so problematic. I would have a Briar Patch, right? I would move my Druid up 1 so that I was covering those front sights of my opponent. So if they played a 3-power minion, the 3-power minion would take a damage for entering their sight when it was played. And these are charge minions. So, right, we're playing with poweries. They play a poweries, it takes a damage. So it's already at 2. Then it tries to move into my bramble patch. It takes another one for entering the patch. It takes another one from Druid. So it takes 3. So it just dies. So for me, this really removes something in my snag deck that I use to try to combat all the charge, all those power 3 charge minions, because they would take a damage upon entering their own site. And then by using a Briar Patch or something like that, it would let me deal that damage. It made the Briar Patch more useful. Now, of course, there's Troll Bridge and there's other things. So it's not a huge change, but it's one less tool in my toolbox to deal with those 3-power charge minions. And I don't like that because those things they're very good. They're very good and problematic in my opinion. So, doesn't affect their sites anymore, only your own. Now the good news is, because it's only your own, my snag deck, I bring people in. I want you to come in. I'm going to bring your avatar over. I'm going to move you around in my area. So overall, it doesn't affect me a ton. But there is one other thing. This this is granting sites an ability. And we have already seen sites in Gothic that silence sites. So now I've lost another potential tool in my toolbox, because I'm fairly certain that some of that silencing of sites, I think a lot of it, is actually going to see some serious play. So that's another thing that has kind of hurt. So big changes. Full on errata, full on text changes. So what is my overall? I'm okay with the Druid change. It has been dominating competitive events. There are more Rainbow Foil Druids out in circulation than any other. So I'm okay with doing some changes to Druid like this. I understand it. It makes sense. I would let all of it, I'd be fine with all of it and be like, I get it. They probably play tested this. They know, even my small gripes about, the charge minions, right? Even that. This is my biggest problem with the changes, though. My big one, my big gripe is the Tawny change. I wish Tawny had been brought to 2 power. You're only going to get her once now. And there are so many deserts in this game. That's just how you remove Tawny. You use deserts. And yes, careful play. You can avoid the deserts. But it's really going to pin Tawny down. It's just Tawny's not going to be able to move until the board is more firmly in place, right? So that Tawny can move to a place where a desert ping is not possible because the sites have filled in. So that's my big gripe. I'm okay with not allowing her to be recurred, but Tawny needs a small power boost to survive deserts, to give it a better chance to have a little bit more survivability, in my opinion. So the changes overall, I'm very happy with the against units change. I think that's great. It's where we need to be. It's going to fix a lot of problems. That one's good. And Lance actually gets a boost. Fantastic. The Druid change, I'm okay with the backside. Like, even my small complaint about charge minions, I still think that's a fine change overall. And it makes sense to do it that way. That is his dominion. It should apply to his allied sites. But that Tawny change, I just want Tawny to have 2 power. Now, I know they didn't give Tawny 2 power because they do not want to be doing this to a bunch of cards. You do not want cards in circulation that do not have the same text as what they are actually played with. That is a serious problem. So Tawny's all of a sudden being 2 power. That would be another card that would have a major errata. So I understand why they didn't do it. But that leads to the problem with these types of changes. I've mentioned on several videos, I loved Decipher's Star Wars CCG. Played it from its beginning to its end. That was my game. When Magic and everyone was doing Magic, and I did play Magic, I dabble in it, but Star Wars was my game. This is what the Star Wars CCG did to deal with problematic cards. I remember one of the big dust-ups in Star Wars was when the Dagobah set came out. There was this card called Asteroid Sanctuary. And they had to make a serious errata to that card. It was such a big change that Decipher actually printed this card, and you could get copies of the updated text. So now, but that actually kind of led to other problems, right? Because there's 2 copies of the cards in circulation. Well, which one's the right one? And so this is the problem with making these type of big errata changes, and why I think Erik's Curiosa has probably tried to avoid it up until this point. You're changing the text. We're going to have new players coming into the game. And this was the same problem that Star Wars would experience. And that, in my opinion, in some ways led to its decline. I mean, the license was lost and there was nothing Decipher could do. But one of the problems was that there were several cards that had these very serious erratas. And so when new players came into the game, they would be playing with the cards. And some of them would show up at a tournament. They'd be like, man, I just discovered this really cool deck. Why has no one figured this out? And this was before the internet, where you could just look everything up. I mean, it wasn't before the internet, but it was before you could just look anything up with Google. You couldn't just do that. So, people would show up at tournaments with this deck, like Asteroid Sanctuary, and they were a new player who was just getting into the game, and then they'd be like, I made this really cool deck, and they're playing in the tournament, and then they'd find out in first round, oh, that's not what that card says anymore. Not a good feeling. Your entire deck doesn't work the way you thought it did. That is the problem that this change to Druid presents. Especially as the game ages. The text on the card is different. It is not the same. Now, to some degree, we already have that. Treat text as. Many of the facts in Curiosa.io have that. The big culprit, Infiltrate, that's the biggest culprit of that trips a lot of people up. But this change, we're talking about an avatar. That is huge. And the question is, how many people will be driven off? Again, only talking about new players. I don't know that current players like myself, like all of you who are probably watching, I don't know that this change will drive us away, because I think many of us would agree that Druid was a problem and it needed something. And for whatever reason, Erik's Curiosa could not find a solution in Gothic. So instead, they had to go this new route of a major errata to the card. But it's the new players who come in and they see the Druid and they're like, that guy's cool. I'm going to use that. And then all of a sudden they come and they play it. Now, hopefully it's in a casual thing, right? Hopefully it's a casual event and they're coming to play and they're like, okay, an experienced player's like, yeah, it doesn't work like that. Here's the text. This is what it says now. You probably want to rework some things, or maybe you want to consider a different avatar, or maybe you're okay with it. Maybe you're okay with the change and you can work around it. Like with Snagged, my Snag deck, I think, can work with this version of Druid pretty much as well as before. Minor caveats, but overall, I think I could make the Snag deck function with this new errata version of Druid. But for a new player, that can be a really bad experience, especially if they discover the change during a tournament situation. It really can make for a bad experience. And I'm sure Erik's Curiosa really thought about making this. I mean, we've been asking the community, I shouldn't say we, many members of the community have been asking Erik's Curiosa to deal with problematic cards rather than waiting for the next set. But, I think many folks had asked for like, well, let's do seasonal bans or just a bans period. When you get into this sticky thing of we're going to change card text, it can have some serious repercussions depending upon how it's implemented and how often it's used. That is key. If Erik's Curiosa keeps a very, very tight lid on how often they do things like this, then the impact should be fairly minimal. But if this becomes something that they do more regularly, there's 2 or 3 cards every set they have to do this to, then we're going to run into some serious issues. And even just the one card, especially since we're talking about an avatar, there can be impact there. There can be people who are like, man, I wanted to play this. They're just changing the text. Why didn't they just ban the card? If the card was just banned and there was a ban list, I could go there and then I would know I couldn't use it. So then I wouldn't even think about it. Instead, I can actually show up at an event and my card doesn't do what I thought it did. It's a trade-off. Erik's Curiosa also wants you to play with the cards that you have, the cards that you want to play with. That's also, been a real mantra of theirs. So they looked at the options and they went with, we're going to go with Errata, not a ban list or a seasonal ban list. This is what we're going to do. So we'll see how it plays out. Because I lived through Star Wars, because I saw it happen. I'm a little worried. Because this is where, and let me see, that was the 4th set. It was the 4th Star Wars set. When that first major errata thing happened. So, it's just some deja vu. Deja vu for me. And, the decline of the game I loved the most. Now, I'm not saying it hinged on that errata, but again, it's deja vu. It's like, oh my gosh, we're doing this again, and I'm part of a game that's issuing these types of full-on erratas. And, I watched a game that I loved go away partially because of that, because we couldn't keep new players because there were erratas and they just didn't want to deal with it. They wanted their card to say what the card said and do what the card said it did. So these types of changes can lead to issues in terms of growing the player base. Be interesting to see how it plays out. I do wonder why this wasn't considered with Archie. I mean, they say in the article, we have a bunch of cards to deal with graveyard, to deal with life gain, to deal with searching your deck. So we've added all these cards, and that's how we're going to control Archie. But I don't know. It feels odd to go about dealing with Archie in that way, because the amount of hate that you have to put in, the amount of cemetery hate you have to put in to deal with Archie, feels like it impacts other cool, viable options that we might have gotten in Gothic. And maybe all that cemetery hate's needed because of the potential, recursion from your cemetery in Gothic is just so powerful. But it does feel like, why didn't we just deal with Archie in this way? I'm just saying, like, now it's an option. I don't know. It'll be interesting to see how it plays out. I think I've covered everything. Big day. I would definitely call this shift seismic. it meets that definition. I don't think this is something Eric's Curiosa ever really wanted to do. I don't think they wanted to issue full-fledged errata. I think that was something they wanted to avoid. So to have been pushed into that situation, I think is something that was very undesirable to them. But now it makes me question, well, it was done with Druid. Why wasn't it done with Archie? And whatever. This is where we're at. And to do it just 2 weeks before Gothic. That's what I think's funny. We're doing this 2 weeks before Gothic. Who knows what could have changed? And I know I already talked to some people and they're like, less Druid is better. All Gothic. That's what we want to. Okay. All right. But I think, although it almost makes you wonder, was this Eric's Curiosa's way of kind of saying, we don't really have a way to deal with Druid, so this is the only way we can do it. Even with what we have in Gothic, we just can't deal with the whole recursion to Tawny. The way the damage was dealt, was that their way of doing it? Or that their way of saying, we couldn't find a way to deal with it in our traditional fashion. Still, big changes for the realm. We'll see where they go. And, again, I think the second change, making it against units for all those cards, I think that change is fantastic. It's going to improve the quality of gameplay for everyone. The Druid change, I'm a little more hesitant, even though Druid obviously needed to be addressed. I think the Tawny change may have been a little too severe without a small power boost to tweak her, to give her a little bit more survivability. That's it for today. I'm probably going to have to film tomorrow. They're going to announce the judge program. I'm going to be talking about it. You all know I've been waiting for this. So, going to be very exciting. There will be another video tomorrow because I'm going to want to talk about the judge program. Unless the information is coming soon, but I don't think it is this time. Yeah. As always, keep on contesting the realm!